So James Gunn's been talking to Zack Snyder? Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but the answer is yes. Let's take a couple minutes to talk about what James Gunn recently revealed about Zack Snyder and all of that talk about selling the Snyderverse to Netflix. Could this actually happen? Well, as many of you know, there's been a big social media push, at least in some corners of the internet, to try to get DC Studios to sell the Zack Snyder Snyderverse over to Netflix so they can continue to tell Zack Snyder's story. As many of you know, Snyder has found a new home over at Netflix, and he really does seem to be enjoying what he's doing with that organization. I said in a video a couple of weeks ago, I felt like this was a total long shot, and it was very unlikely to happen. But quite honestly, James Gunn's silence on the whole thing had me wondering if something was going on behind the scenes. Now, earlier today, he actually responded to a tweet for the Sell the Snyderverse to Netflix hashtag, and I think, quite honestly, he's put this whole story to bed. In the exchange, Gunn actually said, "I have to say, this has got to be the wackiest hashtag ever. Number one, Netflix hasn't expressed any such interest, although we've discussed other stuff. And number two, Zack hasn't expressed any interest and seems to be happy doing what he's doing. And yes, we too have talked." Now, there's a lot to take away there, but it is pretty clear communication from James Gunn, which I have to say has been the highlight of his leadership at DC Studios. He has flat out said he has talked to Netflix, and they haven't expressed any interest. Now, this could be for a multitude of reasons, but as we've pointed out, buying up those franchises would be really expensive, and a lot of streamers are struggling right now, and quite honestly, the price tag, plus the cost to get productions out, Zack Snyder's not a cheap director, means Netflix would really be putting a couple of $1 billion up front and hoping it works out. I also couldn't help but notice that he did mention they have talked to Netflix. So the question there is, well, what did they talk about? This to me indicates some possibilities of some DC projects making their way over to Netflix. And quite honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind are various forms of animation. We have a new Batman series coming up called Caped Crusader, and we've been hearing for quite a while it could be shopped around to various other networks because it wasn't coming to HBO Max. I have to wonder if that's exactly what James Gunn is referencing, and if you're a fan of this channel, it begs the question of, well, what does that mean for Young Justice? Now, the fact that Gunn has talked with Zack Snyder, well, I think that's the more interesting point, because many fans have wondered if Snyder could return under James Gunn's leadership or at least do something with DC. Gunn said in the first tweet that he seemed happy doing what he's doing, which that's a great thing. But a fan did follow up and asked him a little more specifically about what they talked about, and Gunn said, "He contacted me to express his support about my choices. He's a great guy. Again, he seems really happy with the massive world building he's doing now." Now, in case you didn't know, currently Zack Snyder's working on Rebel Moon over at Netflix, and he's being allowed to create his own franchise and IP. For all the big creators, this is always the dream. This is what George Lucas did with Star Wars, and pretty clearly this is what Zack Snyder wants to do with his vision of his new sci-fi world. I also love the fact that Snyder reached out to him to express support for the decisions that James Gunn has been making for the new DC Studios. This is a really mature attitude, and hopefully a signal to many other people that seem a little bit worried about where James Gunn is going, that even the guy they like doing DC, that would be Zack Snyder, is supporting Gunn, and that means to me people really should give this a chance. Now, the possibilities of Snyder returning is pretty interesting, and quite honestly, there's a couple of franchises he might fit in nicely for the future of DC. If that ever happens, we'll have to wait and see. I'm sure a lot of it rides on the potential success of Rebel Moon. His last movie on Netflix was The Army of the Dead, where he started creating his own zombie cinematic universe. It was a pretty big hit with fans, so I think he's probably pretty entrenched at Netflix doing his own thing, and that's not going to change anytime soon.